Well, hi guys, so I now have the Sony 100 to 400 GMaster, but I also bought the 2x extender. So it gives me up to 800mm, which is really cool, especially on the A7R Mark IV. There's a couple of limitations which I'm now going to go into and also discuss and show you some of the photos. Just looking at the difference, guys, between the Rx10 Mark IV and being at 600mm at f4, allowing me to keep my ISO a bit lower, all my shutter speeds higher, easier, compared to the A7R4 with a 100 to 400 GMaster on, plus the 2x converter. Give me 800mm, but obviously a restriction in ISO due to obviously lighting and stuff like that. Once up in the sun like this, no trouble at all, but when you're looking down in the shadows and things like that, it's a little bit different. And now we're at 800mm on the A7R4 with the 100 to 400 GMaster plus the 2x converter. So with this combo, you have obviously the 100 to 400 GMaster lens, which is a f5.6 at its maximum zoom. Obviously, if you add the 2x converter, suddenly you're at f11. If you go back to 200, so obviously it's doubled from 100 to 200, you end up with f9. So there is a little bit of restriction there. But if you have a nice bright day, and to be honest, 99% of the time I would be shooting wildlife, things like that on a bright day, it's not really an issue. And as you can see, you still got some lovely bokeh. The only trouble I can see possibly is if you are shooting larger things, like big birds of prey, your depth of field may not taper off as nicely as this does, because you're going to be further away. So, but it could be interesting to see. But at the end of the day, I didn't get on with the 200 to 600. Don't know why the A7R4 that I own, plus a few others, have that issue, but obviously that's another discussion we've had already. But this seems to work really well. I haven't actually really tried. A couple of shots I've tried with birds in flight, but not many yet. But just mainly because the weather's been absolutely terrible, and it's actually fine now. Well, at least for today anyway. It was absolutely beautiful. Sadly though, this is where I was suffering a little bit. I was shooting at ISO 1000 for all of these shots with the A7R4, and as you'll see, I'll swap in between the Rx10 Mark IV as well to kind of give you a comparison between f4 and f11 on the light point of view rather than depth of field so much. But it performed really well. I'm very surprised on how well it did do. Autofocusing absolutely fast. I didn't think it'd actually focus really well. Obviously I needed a much faster shutter speed there to capture that bird taking off, but not the end of the world. Sharp shots, very much so, and I was actually shooting 800mm down to 1/200th of a second a couple of times, just experimenting really. But most of the time I was shooting anywhere between 1/500th of a second and 800th of a second, thereabouts, to get some shots, utilizing different focus points. So some of the flexible small spot, some were on center and some were on zone. I didn't use wide at all, apart from when I was videoing the planes flying over. This shot here is actually a mega crop, the blackbird there, because actually the bird feeder was just above its head. These shots here are full 60 megapixels. There, worked really well. I was very surprised actually. But you are obviously at 800mm, so the more you've got more movement from your pivot as such, so you can actually end up with a softer shot if you're not careful. I did end up with a couple when I just tweaked the shutter speed a little bit and just hoped for the sun to come through, because I went out down the garden when it was just after sunrise, so the sun came up. As you can see here, the birds like to hide in the shade for some reason rather than go on the sunny side, but hey ho. Yeah, so works really nicely, very pleased. And one of the main benefits I've already noticed is small birds. 800mm, I can get close to them without any trouble, no massive cropping in issues compared to 600mm. Sometimes 600mm is not quite enough. I know we're always greedy and we want more, but as you can see here, you know, plenty close enough really, especially if you were to print big. I mean, I've still got cropping power because remember these are 60 megapixel images, so I could crop in down to 26 quite happily, even 20. You're still laughing really, aren't you, considering that's what the Rx10 Mark IV is. So the scope you've got with this is unbelievable. Autofocus, like I say, I'm shooting into dark, not darkness, but it was fine. It picked out his eye, his beak, no problem at all. I know there's a little bit of light coming in, but still it's shooting through the holly bush. Found him no problem at all. Same with the robin there. And as you'll see, there'll be some comparisons between the Rx10 Mark IV and the A7R4 as we go through. Kind of just to show you the difference, really. I've not put shutter speeds or ISOs in here because most of the time I was at ISO 1000 with the A7R4. Rx10, I was anywhere between 200 and 400. So it just shows you the difference that you have with that much extra light coming through. Cat, just basking in the sun slightly, just sitting there looking at me. Super sharp, no trouble whatsoever. I was about 25 feet away, something like that. Maybe a little bit further. And again, just rotated his head slightly into the sun, which gave him lit both of his eyes. Quite a cool cat, really. After the birds, funnily enough, so he did get a bit of a shoo away, just to get rid of him. And then on the Rx10 Mark IV, so that's the difference between 600 and 800, but also the difference between a full frame sensor there. You can see the depth of field slightly difference, obviously a longer reach on the lens as well. So even the full frame sensor and lens at f11 still had a better depth of field than the Rx10. That's just down to sensor size. This shot here, I'm shooting to the fence. Robin stood on it there, and with the Rx10 there, f4 again. Still beautiful shots both sides. You've got really soft backgrounds, really great on both images, but just lack of light. I mean, it didn't really help the bird was looking left rather than right. There's the Rx10 there, similar shot. As you can see, on both cameras you can literally just blow the backgrounds out really nicely. And I'm around about 20-25 feet still away from the bird itself. So if I could get closer without him freaking out, it would have been great. So up into the tree there, that's about 30 feet up. The Rx10 there, 600mm f4, and then the difference between the 800mm there. This is zoomed in a little bit just to show you the sharpness, but that's the image. Quality difference is very different. It is very different, but also obviously depending on what my shutter speeds were and how much exposure I gave. This shot here again, really pleased. I was, blown away. I wasn't getting this much. Wasn't getting as many good shots like this with the 200 to 600. For me personally, don't know. There's an issue out there that we don't know what it is really. Some camera bodies are just not quite up to the job for the 200 600. We don't know. But anyway, as you can see here, shooting into the holly bush again. With the Rx10 there. Yeah, really pleased on how well it worked. And the A7R4 actually shooting at ISO 1000, even up to 2000, absolutely fine. It's if you're trying to shoot high ISO with no light. I think that's where the A7R4 does struggle. But when you've got light, it's a nice light, it's soft, but you've got to crank it up a little bit to get enough light onto the camera. That's where it still excels. That was ISO 1000. You wouldn't even know. It's great. This is where it struggled. This is in dark shade, and obviously I'm shooting. This is ISO 2000. This shot here, just to get enough light in there. It was dark. There was a little bit of light coming down through the tree behind you. You can see on the leaves. But then this is the difference between him turning around slightly, which gave me a little bit of light onto him. He hopped along the wall slightly, and then you can see the difference between the Rx10 shooting at f4. There you go. It's a little bit brighter, but I could shoot ISO 200 and not 2000. And a lower shutter speed, because the Rx10 is small. You can get away with sort of 1/200th of a second at 600mm quite happily. So there are some benefits. It's like everything. You just get used to using what you have and changing your techniques and making the most of it. Again, really pleased with the results. Benefit of having a big lens shooting small subjects, and this is the kind of birds I would be photographing most of the time, is you get the depth correct. you know, the bird is pretty much all in focus, but then the background just drops away really nicely. So, you know, it does work in my favour in some respects. The sharpness, very happy with it. When someone says, "Oh, it's got 2x Go out, it's going to make your images soft," I'm like, "Really? Okay." You have to have the right shutter speeds, obviously, to deal with it. But even the plane. So that plane, when I zoomed on it, you could actually see a little bit of rippleage. I thought, that's actually air distortion created, you know, obviously from distance. So it was about 20,000 feet, I suppose, that plane. One thing I realised as well, you can actually focus much closer. So where the 200 or 600, for example, was like a 2.5 meter minimum distance, I'm at about, I think, a meter or maybe slightly less than a meter, and that's the Rx10 Mark IV. Yeah, so in usability wise on some things, absolutely amazing. So this is my first real use of this combo, guys. So there will be more once we get some decent weather, but it keeps raining or snowing or being misty and foggy, and obviously the winter sunlight is gone before you know it. But yeah, so anyway, don't forget to click the subscribe button, little notification bell, and here's one last shot that I took, a random cat walking through, pretty cool. He looked pretty awesome. His eyes were really blue, so that worked quite nicely. But we'll see you soon for another video, and there'll be loads more coming. I've got a few other things in the pipeline ready to go, so watch this space.